Hello everyone, welcome back to the Talent500 YouTube channel, and this is SDET interview series. I have created many more videos on the same series, so those links are in the description section. So I would definitely suggest you to go through those videos before coming to this one, because all those are interlinked. So yes, so stay with us and let us know your input if you have any in the comment section. Hello everyone. So let's start with our interview session series, right? And this is the second part of API testing interview question and answer. I would definitely suggest to pay more importance towards API testing interview series. Why? Because these days the demand of backend and service level testing has been exponentially increased, right? Okay, so let's start quickly with the interview question. So the question is, what is the difference between 401 and 403 status code? So the intention behind this interview question is to realize that how means you guys are able to understand the difference between authorization and authentication, right? So why it's that? So 401 usually you get, and when there is a mistake in credentials. So what do we mean by that? So let's you are trying to log in into an application, and in the login username and password you have done some mistake. So whenever you make mistake in your login username and password, you are supposed to get unauthorized, and that is 401. So 401 status code is for unauthorized, and you usually get it when you try to make some mistake in the credentials part. So what is 403 now? 403 is forbidden. Forbidden means a real-time example would be the username and password is correct. That means there is no problem in your credentials. But what happened? The table or the data you are trying to access, you don't have proper access for that particular table, right? What do we mean by that? For example, there is a table called as admin data, right? And you have logged in as a normal user, and you are trying to access data from admin table. In that case, what will happen? Though your credentials are correct, but you are a normal user, so you don't have access to read or write the file from admin data table, right? So this is kind of a real-time example. So whenever they will ask you 401 403 status code along with the definition of unauthorized and forbidden, do give these two examples, right? It will make more sense when you give real-time examples, right? So overall, to summarize, 401 wrong credentials, 403 correct credentials, but no access for the particular data, right? Got it. So next, move on to the next question. What are the difference between put and post? In our previous series, I have explained you properly on put, post and patch. So if you haven't watched it, then do watch that video. So basically what happened in put and post, overall, if I say put is for update operations and post is for create operations, right? For example, if I use get user management users, get all users, post user management users, create a new user, right? So once you create a new user, right? Once you create a new user, to check that okay, that user has been properly created, you can use the get method. Okay, and the same thing happened in put also. Once you do some update, you can use the get call to verify that whatever update you have done, that has been properly implemented or not. So now what is the main differences if we talk about put is for update, post is for create? Put is idempotent, post is not idempotent, right? Idempotency usually means that you are making the same request again and again, but you are going to get the same response for it. So put is idempotent, right? But post is not idempotent, right? It don't allow to make the same request again and again, and you cannot expect the same response for it, right? So that's why put is idempotent, but post is not idempotent. Put is for update operation, post is for create operation, right? A simple example, if they ask you, can you give me an example of put and post, you can say that okay, for an example, I am trying to create a user, right? I am trying to create a new user, then I'm going to use post. But while creating the user, if I have done some mistake while writing the address and I want to update that address, then I'm going to use put, right? So new entry post, change in the existing entry put, right? Awesome. And one more thing I want to add over here. Post, usually you supposed to get the status code is 201. For put, you supposed to get the status code as 200. Okay, Just remember that one. Now, sometime they ask this one also, okay? Is there any change in the status code or not, right? So yes, there is a small change in status code. Into put you expect 200, in post you expect 201. Now the third question, what is the difference between REST and SOAP? This is a very famous question people used to ask, okay? Before we answer this, just remember that SOAP is Simple Object Access Protocol and REST is Representational State Transfer. This is the full form, right? SOAP is a protocol, but REST is an architecture style. That means when you try to design an API and when you use the REST architecture style, then it will be called as a RESTful web service. Always remember this difference. Okay, REST is an architectural style. When you implement this architecture style, then we call it as RESTful service. But SOAP is a protocol, right? And SOAP has a very interesting thing that it uses only XML, right? So if you can see the 1 2 3 4 fifth point, SOAP is only compatible with the XML format. So that is one good thing also, but this is the main disadvantage also. So if you want to go for JSON or any another kind of data format, right, JSON, HTML, XML, JSON, HTML or plain text, then you cannot use SOAP. That's where REST gets its upper hand. REST is compatible with almost all type of data format, right? For example, plain text, JSON, HTML, XML, everything, right? That is one of the main benefit of REST also. Now the another thing is SOAP is little bit more secured, you can say, right, as compared to REST, right? It has that's why it is being used in most of the banking or stock market exchange, stock exchange sector, right? You will find SOAP APIs. That doesn't mean REST is not secured. REST is secured, but it has less security as compared to the SOAP, because SOAP has its own SOAP is kind of a protocol, right? So it has its own encryption and decryption logic where the security enhances, right? But in REST it doesn't work in that way. But we cannot say in like REST does not have security. It is secured, but little bit less as compared to the SOAP, right? A typical example of REST API is Twitter API, okay? Always remember this. Twitter API is REST API only. SOAP is stock market API, stock exchange APIs are mostly on the SOAP front. And in SOAP, one thing you should remember, it consists of WSDL. Okay, you will get a WSDL for that. Okay. One more important thing you should consider, the SOAP needs more bandwidth for its usage. Since SOAP messages contains a lot of information, the amount of data transfer leveraging SOAP is a lot. But REST on the other hand does not need as much bandwidth. There is one more point why, just giving you a little bit of more context. REST can do the caching thing, but SOAP does not do the caching thing, right? And due to this caching thing, REST is little bit faster as compared to SOAP also. Okay, that is also one point we should consider. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the second one. What is next one? What is the head method in API testing, right? So mostly the methods that we use in regular day-to-day work is put, post, patch, delete, get. Okay, these 5 are the most used methods. But what happened in interview, they are asking another 2 type, that is head and options, right? They will ask you this one, what is head method in API testing and how it is different from get method. This is the exact question you will get. So head method is pretty much similar to get method. It only retrieves the headers of the response message, which includes information about the resource. What do we mean by that? In get method, what we get in the response, the response status code and the body, both, right? So let me show you this one too. Let me show you with an example. Let's go back to our postman, right? So this is my get method, correct? So if I hit this method, what I get, sorry, let me change it to get, okay, and hit this method. So what I get, I have received one status code along with the response body. But if the exact same endpoint, if you hit with the head, what you will get only the status code. Can you see? Only status code, no body. So head and get both are same, but what's the difference? In head you will not get the response body, but in get you will get the response body. And one thing you must have seen here, the headers are 16, response headers are 16, right? And if I use get, the headers are 17. So there is no much difference, right? It's same only. Just you need to focus on headers also you will get in head method. So if somebody asks you, do we get headers in the head method, then yes, in head method, headers you will get, status code you will get, but the response body will not be present, right? Makes sense, correct? So this is the main difference between your head and get method, correct? Now the second one is, what is the use of options method in API testing? So option methods is used to retrieve the HTTP methods. For example, let you have an endpoint and you want to know that what are the types of API methods this endpoint usually support, right? Then what you will do, you will usually hit option and it will give you all the supported methods for that particular endpoint. So this one also I will show you an example. It will make more sense for you. Okay, so what I will do for this specific endpoint, right, I'm going to use options, right? And if I hit send, see, you will not get anything in body response, anything, right? The status code would be mostly 204 content. How you are going to see the method supported by this endpoint? Go to header section, come over here, access control allow methods. Can you see access control allow methods? So if I will come over here, you can see all those API methods are supported for this particular resource endpoint, right? So that's why whenever you have to check that, okay, what are the API methods supported by this specific endpoint, then you can simply come over here and check in the header section. Right, so option part we have seen with the example. So always remember, whenever you are explaining this head and options, do keep an example for it, right? And whatever example I have shown you, try to explain with that example, so it would be more easy for you, right, to explain also, and it is easy for the interviewer also to figure out that what are your understanding on head and options, correct? Okay, now let's move on to the what is the difference between web services and APIs, right? So web services are nothing but whatever you can access through the internet, those are basically considered as web services, whatever application you are accessing, correct? That's why all web services are APIs, but all APIs are not web services, right? All web services are APIs, but all APIs are not web services. Why? Because there are some APIs which does not require internet. For example, operating system APIs, database APIs, library APIs. Those APIs does not require internet to access those. In that case, those will not be considered as your web services, right? But the vice versa doesn't work. But all web services are working by internet, those are also considered as APIs. Now web services supports XML. Responses are formatted in the API using web API's media type formatter into XML, JSON and any other given format, right? Web services uses three styles: REST, SOAP and XML RPC for communication. API can be used for any style of communication, right? And web services supports only for HTTP protocol, but APIs provide support for the HTTPS protocol too, URL requests, response headers, etc., right? Those who are not aware of HTTPS protocol, do revise that. Okay, what is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS? Because when they will ask you web services versus APIs, and when you say that, okay, it provides support for HTTP but API provides support for HTTPS, then expect a cross question asking that what would be the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. So the main difference is secured, right? HTTPS is more secured, and the main reason behind is SSL, right? So you can learn a little bit about SSL, how it works and everything. It will give an additional benefit for you, right, while appearing for the interviews. The next one would be synchronous and asynchronous API. This is very important. Okay, so synchronous and asynchronous are two different type of APIs which we deal in our day-to-day work. So synchronous API is, if an API call is synchronous, it means that code execution will block for the API call to return before continuing. This means that until a response is returned by the API, your application will not execute. So what do we mean by that? Let me give you an example. So for you are trying to test an API from e-commerce website, right? You have to log in, then you have to place an order. Now, unless your login is successful, you cannot go and place an order. You're getting the point, right? So assume there are two APIs, one API for login, one API for placing the order. Now, unless your login API is successful, you cannot go for the placing an order API, right? So there is a dependency. You are blocking the second API call because you have a dependency on the first API call, right? So once your first API call is executed, then only you can proceed further with the second one. So this is nothing but your synchronous. In synchronous, when you are sending a request from client to server, unless you get the response from the server, you cannot proceed further, right? That means client is asking that, okay, login, those are the login credentials. When server say, okay, credentials are correct, your login is successful, then only you can proceed further to place an order. This is a typical example of your synchronous API, right? Now what happened in asynchronous? It's just the opposite. Asynchronous calls do not block for the API call to return from the server execution. Server execution continues on in your program, and when the call returns from the server, a callback function is executed. So basically, here only the messaging queue services comes into picture, like Kafka, PubSub. Those are the messaging queue services, right? Many times we figure we are unable to understand why we use those messaging service. So those messaging service comes into picture when there is an asynchronous API call is happening. So let me give you an example. In this case, what happened? Once you make the first API call, you don't have to wait for the server to respond. Rather, once you make the API call, you can proceed further. For example, uploading a video, right? For example, you are uploading, this is just a hypothetical example to explain you. Let you are trying to uploading two videos, right? Video 1 and video 2. And video 1 will take 30 minutes, video 2 will take 30 minutes. So now you click on upload video 1, upload video 2. You cannot wait until the first video will be completely uploaded, right? Then only you will be able to upload the second video. For example, in Google Drive, when you try to upload multiple files, you just click on upload files and select the 10 files, right? And then it will keep on uploading. You don't wait for the first file to upload complete, then only you can proceed further for the second upload, right? In that case, this is kind of a asynchronous. You are not waiting for the first job to get completed, right? Rather, you can make the call and proceed further with the second call, right? All those days, those Insta videos and all those small video app are there, right? Mostly they function in the asynchronous API call. And how this callback works, actually what happens behind the scene, just to give you a context, if you get any follow back question, then you should answer. So if they will ask how asynchronous API works, then so what you should say, in asynchronous API, client is making a call to server and then it moves on to make the another call, right? Now what happens behind the scene? Server will process your request, right? And once it is complete, it will not send directly to the client, rather it will send to your messaging queue, right? So the response from server will be saved in your messaging queue. Now your client will keep on polling your messaging queue server to get the details of the responses for the previously made calls, right? So client server, in between then there is messaging queue. Client make call 1, then client make call 2, right? When the call 1 completed, server will inform the messaging queue that, okay, this call 1 is completed. Now messaging queue will not respond it back to the client immediately. Client will make a polling to messaging queue that, okay, what's the status? The messaging queue will tell the, okay, the status is call 1 completed, call 2 in progress, call 3 is not started. So this is how basically behind the scene it works. Okay, so synchronous, asynchronous, points to note it. Synchronous is a continuous, asynchronous is not continuous. It will block, right? If synchronous will block, if API 1 is not completed, it will not move on to API 2. Asynchronous, you can make you don't have to wait for API 1 to complete, rather you can just proceed further for the API 2. The examples I have given, just try to give those examples, it will add a lot of values. Okay, awesome. So the next question is, what is the difference between REST and RESTful? Here there is a small trick, okay? Never get confused with this. REST and RESTful, though it sounds similar, but both are different. Why? Because REST is just the architecture style. But when you implement this architecture style, it will be called as RESTful. So the short answer is, REST stands for representational state transfer. It's an architectural pattern for creating web services. But when you create the web services or implement this pattern, it will be called as RESTful service. All right. So RESTful service are type of web services that uses HTTP protocol to exchange data, right? See, every web services means there is a client server, right? Client is making a request to server. Server is responding to your request, right? So there is always a client server and there is always a request response. Correct. Always keep this in mind. When we are talking about all those web services, there will be client server request response. Correct. Now to make this communication we need to take help of some protocols, and those are nothing but HTTP, HTTPS protocol. So those protocols help us to exchange our data during the request and responses between whom? Client and server. So just try to connect all those dots, right? Client server request response and HTTP, HTTPS protocol, because all those things are connected. If you don't understand these things, it would be difficult for you to answer in the product companies, right? Always remember this: request and response happens between client and server, right? But to make it happen, protocol help us to exchange the data. One of the key characteristics of RESTful web services is they are stateless, meaning they do not store any information about the client. What do we mean by they do not store any information about the client? That means every time you send a request, you need to send all the details about your client. And that's why we use those headers, right? Authentication, path param, query param. All those are nothing but the information you are sending about your client to the server, right? Why? Because your server is not storing it. Correct. That's why every time you are making a request, you need to send all the details along with your request. Correct. Because server, and it is also a benefit for your RESTful web service, because server does not need to store any information about the client between requests, so it is much fast and scalable. Correct. So this is kind of a benefit for you. So the points to note: REST and RESTful pattern difference that I have told, right? It is the pattern, and when you implement RESTful, in RESTful it is stateless because it does not store any information. And why it does not store? Because it want to make it fast. But there is a con: you have to always send all the details about your client in every request, right? Now the second one is, what are the types of APIs? This is a very important one. Okay, so usually what happens when they ask this one, they want to figure out that how much you have worked in real time. So in real time, mostly we deal with internal APIs, partner APIs, and open APIs. Open APIs are also called as public APIs. Okay, so what do we mean by public API? Public API means it is the API which is exposed to everyone and we all can access those. For example, Twitter API, Google Maps API, right? Those are open to all. Means if you want, you can go and access those APIs. You do not need any additional access or something like that. So open APIs are nothing but the APIs which you can access. Correct? These are available to developers and other users with minimal restrictions. Now, what do you mean by internal APIs? Internal APIs means internally for your organization. You are working for an organization called as ABC. Then the APIs which your developer can only use, those APIs will be internal APIs, right? For example, just giving you a small example, you want to you have created an API which will give information about the salary structure in ABC company. So now that will be internal API, right? Why they will expose it to outsiders, right? They want to keep it specific to maybe HR team only. Correct. So that is a typical example of internal APIs, which is only for access inside the ABC company. Correct. Now, what is partner API? Third one is our partner API. This is very important, okay, because here your integration testing mostly comes into picture. Partner APIs means these are similar to internal APIs but are intended for use by specific business partner. For example, you have created an startup, right? And for payment, you are dependent on Visa and Mastercard APIs. Then that would be your partner APIs, right? Because you are not creating your own payment structure, rather than you are consuming the partner APIs provided by Visa and Mastercard. In that case, what happened? Visa and Mastercard APIs are accessed by you, right? But it is not public. It is an internal, but still you are able to access because you are their partner. You have paid them to access their APIs, right? So there is a contract with them. That's why it is called as partner APIs. And whenever we consume any third party APIs, it is usually a partner APIs. And that's where you need to focus on integration testing. Right? Always remember this: partner APIs comes into picture means you need to make sure that whatever third party or partner APIs you are consuming, that is up to the mark. The structure has been maintained, the schema has been maintained, everything you need to do over here in the partner API. You have to do contract testing, you have to do schema validation, everything will happen over here. Right? And you have to pay much more attention here because you are consuming external things. So you have to make sure that no security has been compromised, right? The data has been properly communicated, the structure is properly maintained. So you have to pay a lot of attention here, right? Fourth one is composite. This is not much important, right? This is just a combination of multiple endpoints into a single API, allowing developers to access multiple functions with a single call. For example, you are buying something on Amazon or Walmart, right? Now for that, you are first selecting a product, you are adding it to the cart, then you are going to the checkout, making the payment, right? Instead of that, what I will do, so maybe three APIs are there, right? One is cart API, one is your checkout API, one is your payment API. Instead of creating three different APIs, I will create one API and I will name it as order API. So when you click on that, automatically it will add it to your cart, and you will redirect it to checkout, and it will automatically redirect you to the payment. So this is nothing but your combining multiple endpoints into a single API, so the user experience would be enhanced. But it is not always like for user experience. I'm just giving you an hypothetical example, right? So whenever you feel like, okay, I instead of using three different endpoints, I can merge those things, so it would be easy for use. Then it is nothing but a composite API. As I told in the example, I have combined all the three into one and called it as order API. Correct? So we have learned about four APIs: open, internal, partner, composite. Important ones are partner APIs, which is very important for you because that's where you will get a lot of cross questions. And give the examples I have given, okay? That will make more sense. Only definitions is not going to help much. Always remember this, because many times they ask you 401, 403, you will say unauthorized, forbidden. And you will feel like, okay, why I got rejected? The main reason behind the rejection is you haven't given any example to them. So whenever you answer anything, have an example. That's why in every question I'm giving you example. Now coming to this last one, what are the components of API documentation? Before understanding this, try to understand what is API documentation. So what happens whenever you start API testing, you need some information. For example, your endpoint. What are the headers you need, right? What are the authorization token you need, right? What is the expected status code? What is the expected response body, right? When you send a request, what would be the request body? All those information need to be stored somewhere, right? That is nothing but your API documentation. So API documentation means it is a set of documents that provide information about your functionalities, usage, inputs, outputs, and other details. But what I have told, that is more real time. So try to explain in that way rather than in this definition, right? So now API documentation will have all the details that you need to perform your API testing, right? But there are some 8 important things I have noted down over here. First is your API endpoints. Second is your parameters. Third is your HTTP methods. For example, what are the methods you have, right? Authentication requirement, response format, error code and message, data type, know about your mandatory and optional field. Let me show you in an example over here. So this is nothing but your Swagger. So the most famous API documentation is done by Swagger only. There are many more. API documentation can be done with your Jira, it can be done with Excel, it can be done with Confluence, it can be done with over an email, right? So there is no strict rule, but yes. So that's why when you talk about API documentation, you should remember that at least you get all those information in your API documentation. No matter wherever you are getting in Swagger, it's fine. If you're not getting in Swagger also, you should check that all those information are there or not, right? So let's map API endpoint, correct? So when I talk about API endpoint, right? So this is nothing but my API endpoint /account /v1 /authorized, right? So this information should be there. If you can see in every endpoint, this information is there. Those are nothing but your endpoints. Parameters means whenever you are sending this one, see UUID is there. That means I need to send my user ID for this particular endpoint, right? So whenever you have something like this in the parameter sections, that is nothing but your parameters. See, those are parameters. So it will be mentioned that after endpoints, you need to check that the parameters required for this endpoint is present or not. Third is HTTP methods. For sure, if you can see this green one, post method, this is delete method, this is get method. So the method, what kind of API method it is, it should be mentioned over there. Authentication requirement. So authentication requirement means whenever you are accessing, for example, you are accessing this endpoint. In this, whatever authentication is required, it should be mentioned, or else how you will figure out that what kind of authentication it need, right? For example, this generate token you are doing. So you need to send your username and password, right? Then only this token will get generated. Correct. Similarly, if you are making some request, what kind of authentication it required to process this one, it should be mentioned over here in your API docs, right? It should be definitely mentioned that what kind of authentication or authorization is required. Response format. So how you will see, for example, this is, let's take an example of this one, right? Get, correct. So now when I execute this one, right, in the Swagger, I will get the response body along with the format, right? So those details should be there, correct? How your response body should look like, right? And what would be the format. If you can see here, you will see the example value and model, right? This should be your model, correct? This should be your model, right? Those details should definitely mentioned in your, this is the most important part, okay? Pay attention over here, because your response format, you should have the data types also. Can you see data types of input fields and point number 7, 5 and 8 will be mentioned over here. If you can see data type, this is a string, this is a string, right? This is a number. All those information should be mentioned along with your response format, right? So response format, your data type, your mandatory and optional field, everything would be mentioned over here in the example value or model section. Okay, so pay attention over there for 5, 7, 8, because this is where your scenario you will get create. You will change your data types and validate, right? You will remove the mandatory field and you should expect a 400 bad request. So those scenarios you have to add according to this data, correct? 6-point error code and messages 100%. If you can see over here, let me take you back over here. So now there's status code. So if you notice, they have mentioned over here status code. What is the status code? 200 for success, 400 for error, 404 for error. And they will also inform you that what kind of error code or messages you will get. This is the error code, this is the error message. This is the error code, this is the error. So this is kind of thing you are going to expect from your responses. See, responses. So that is nothing but your point number 6, error code and messages, the list of error codes and messages that the API can return if something goes wrong, right? So always remember, whenever you get your API documentation, if it is in Swagger, so far so good, right? Because everything is well explained. If it is not in Swagger, then make sure that all those 8 points has been properly mentioned. If it is not mentioned, what should you do? Because they will ask you this. For example, you didn't get your API documentation, then what would you do? You may reach out to your backend developer. You may go through the architecture document, or worst case scenario, you can go through the network tab of any application, and then you will try to figure out of your own. But that is not a correct approach. To go and check in the network tab. But sometime maybe you can come to this network tab, and if I will show you, if you just refresh this one, you can see, okay? See, request URL, everything you will get over here, responses, URL, headers. You can get those details from this network tab, okay? But it's not advisable, but okay, you should know about it. Right? I hope you guys have understood whatever we have discussed, and pay attention to the examples part I am giving, because if you explain the examples, the chances of getting through the interview round would be more higher, right? So tips and tricks, definitely understand the basics of API properly. Okay, no need to go through any high fundo things. Just stick to the basics and concepts. It is very important. And definitely subscribe to the channel, right? So that next time when I prepare anything, it will reach out to you guys, correct? I hope you guys have liked the session, and I have created a lot of series on SDET, so do go and check those out. And please subscribe to the Talent500 YouTube channel, so that next time when we prepare a interview series, you guys will be notified about it. Till then, take care, bye-bye, and do remember, if you have any doubt, put it in the comment section.